Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of my yet-to-be-named podcast. I'd love to hear suggestions if you've got some good ones because I'm stuck and need help brainstorming. Anyway, every week I will be discussing my favorite cards for a specific archetype in the current Magic the Gathering set. Today I'll be going over how to draft Gruul in Brothers War. Gruul is red-green, and according to Wizards of the Coast, it is the mechanized Stompy archetype, and I think it's a decent description. In Gruul, I want to be playing cards that create power stones, so I can play big, beefy artifact creatures. Excavation Explosion is my top common for Gruul. I talked about how much I love this card in episode 1 when we dived into the best cards for Boros, and in episode 3 when we talked about the best cards for Izzet. If you are in red, you want to run this card. This card is excellent. In Gruul, the most important part is that it creates a power stone. Since you're playing a mid-range strategy, this is helpful to remove an early threat and ramp to your big creatures. It can also be used to hit them directly for 3, and I've definitely won quite a few games that way. Gaia's Gift is the reason I end up in Gruul. This card wheels, and I really don't understand why. If I'm in Gruul, I want 3 or 4 of these, and it's definitely not too hard to get. In general, I think people avoid combat tricks, but this card gives you so much. It's a permanent +1/+1 counter, and it gains Reach, Trample, Hexproof, and Indestructible for a turn. It also performs the best in Gruul. The Reach can snag a flyer. Just remember to cast it before declaring blockers, because the creature needs to have Reach before the blocking phase to count as an eligible blocker. I've messed this up, so please learn from my mistakes. The Trample is a great way to get damage through on your big creatures, and you can use the Hexproof in response to your opponent playing removal, like Overwhelming Remorse. My last Tier 1 common is Scrapwork Mutt. This card has been in every guide I've made so far, and it's great in Gruul. You really need to curve into your big creatures, and this card helps you do just that. It also works well with the Power Stone synergy, and can be played, you can use the Power Stones to play the card itself, or to unearth it. So, that's it for the commons, though. And with the previous archetypes I've covered, there's usually more commons, sometimes even as many as 10. And for that reason, I don't think Gruul can support many people drafting it. You do have some decent filler options that I think I'll mention now. One is Argothian Opportunist, which is a decent filler if you are lacking Power Stone production, but I think it's a worse choice than Excavation Explosion. And Giant Growth, you could use that instead of Gift, but if you aren't seeing Gifts wheel, I'd suggest going for a different archetype. And you can also pick up some good filler with like Scrapwork Cohort or Boulder Branch Golem. Any of these colorless artifacts that you can use your Power Stones to ramp to are great to include. As well, Aeronaut's Wings you can use your Power Stones to cheaply give something flying, and is pretty decent in Gruul. But definitely not as good as the 3 commons that I just mentioned. So I think a lot of my Gruul decks are driven by what is available at the uncommon level, as there are so few commons that catch my eye. And the uncommon that pushes me into Gruul is my only Tier 1 uncommon for Gruul, and that is Self-Assembler. This card gets taken pretty late. I wouldn't expect it to wheel, but it's not too hard to end up with multiples. And for me, it embodies the mechanized Stompy strategy. It performs okay in most green decks because of the Power Stone synergy, but it is best in Gruul. If you can get 2 or 3 of these, it's great to chain them. And I don't recommend playing the Assembly Worker Tron cards, the ones that get more powerful when all 3 are in play, as that is more of a meme. But I do want to take advantage that this card is very underdrafted. Horned Stoneseeker is a mythic level uncommon in Rakdos and in Boros, but similar to Izzet, it's just great in Gruul because you aren't usually applying as much early pressure, and instead you're trying to go win through your mid-range strategy. So the Power Stone is the most important part of this card, but because you have to sacrifice a Power Stone if this dies, sometimes your opponent can ruin your strategy. It's still great, and I'll happily include as many as I can get. And also of note, it is a great signaling card. You see this around pick 5 or pick 6, you can definitely use that as a signal that red is open. And I'm not sure if there is a more satisfying card to play on turn 4 in a mid-range deck than Obstinate Baloth. This is a 4/4 that gains 4 life and is excellent. It's a great pick for any green deck outside of Simic. Just keep in mind that the 2 and double pip green wants 11 sources of green to reliably cast this on turn 4. So if you end up with multiples of this card, you definitely want the majority of your deck to be green. This is also a good signaling card that if you see it on pick 5 or pick 6, green is definitely open. Skyfisher Spider is definitely worth including in your Gruul deck. It is a mythic level uncommon in Golgari, but it is a really great card to splash if you are already base green or base black. It's great removal, and the reach stops a ton of the pesky 2/2 flyers. It's also worth mentioning that in green you can pick up cards like Sentinel Stalwarts, which can help you get the 4 black sources that I recommend running a splash for 1 to 3 cards. Mask of the Jade Crafter is the last of my tier 2 uncommons. This card gives you so much mid-range value, it's insane. And it's really how you leverage your Power Stone production, because the entirety of this card benefits from Power Stones. I will take as many of these as I can get in Gruul. Now for my tier 3 uncommons. Giant Cindermaw is usually a card that I'm looking to include as many as I can get when I have access to red, but it performs a little worse in Gruul. The biggest non-bow or anti-synergy is that it prevents gaining life, and in a deck that wants to be running cards like Baloth or Boulder Branch Golem, this can end up hurting you more than your opponent. Audacity is a card that I only want to play in Gruul. This card goes super late and even wheels some of the time, but it's not what I want to fill my deck with. It's a cheap way to give a big creature trample, and when it dies and goes to the graveyard, you get to draw a card. I'm happy running 1 or 2, but because of how available this card is, it's really tempting to run like 3 or 4 of them, and I don't think it's good enough. Arbalist Engineers is a very interesting card and is worth discussing in greater detail. Personally, I recommend going for more of a mid-range strategy in Gruul, where you just play this as a 2/2 for 3 that produces a Power Stone, which makes it an inferior version of the common Argothian Opportunist. But mid-range is definitely not the only strategy to build in Gruul. You can also make a very aggressive low-to-the-ground aggro deck. So if you find yourself without very many Masks of the Jade Crafters or Self-Assemblers to chain, etc., you can play this as a 3/3 trample haste. Just try to keep the bigger picture in mind when you pick this up and when you play it, because in the aggro deck I want 4 of these, and in the mid-range deck I can usually find better cards to produce Power Stones. Mishra's Research Desk is also a card I generally want as many of as I can get in red, but not so in Gruul. Since you're going to be running a fair amount of top end in a mid-range deck, it hurts so much when you pop this and 2 really great late game cards get turned over and you can't play either of them. So it's still good for curving out and finding your lands, but it performs much better in Rakdos, Izzet, and Boros, which all aim to have cheap things to play. The last uncommon that I think is worth mentioning is Ashnod's Harvester. Now, if I'm going for the mid-range deck, I don't want this card, but if I'm going for the aggro strategy, I definitely want as many as I can get. So once again, keep the bigger picture in mind and don't end up building a deck that is trying to do 2 different things, which I think is really easy to do in Gruul. Now for the rares. Tyrant of Kara Ridges is my S tier card for red, and Gruul is no exception. This card is a mid-range boss, and it removes a creature or hits for 4 to the face when it's played, and then it can threaten a ton of damage. One thing to be aware of, though, is that this really wants to be in a mostly red deck, and if you pick this up, it's a reason to be in a mostly red deck. Titania's Command is a S tier card in any green deck, creating 2 2/2s and then giving everything on your board permanent +2/+2 counters. Means that even on an empty board, this is an 8/8 for 6 that just gets better the more that you have on your board. It's also worth noting that it performs best in Gruul. I think this is because Golgari has self-mill, and sometimes you see your Titania's Command end up in the graveyard, while Simic and Celestia are more of ramp strategies rather than true mid-range. And it is worth noting, too, that the double pip in green means that you want to be running at least 9 sources, and I think that can come into play with Celestia, where you might have more of a white deck. So, anyway, if you can play this on turn 6, you will probably win the game. Steel Seraph is a tier S rare in every deck, but it performs best in Celestia and Gruul, where you can ramp to it through Power Stones. And even if you give a big beefy creature flying, that's great. If you don't have a target to hit with this, just a 5/4 flyer that can with lifelink that you can ramp to on, say, like turn 5 is fantastic. Simian Simulacrum is also a tier S card in many decks, but performs the best in Celestia and Gruul. It fits that colorless artifact creature Power Stone synergy, and in green you're also able to protect the target of your counters with Gaia's Gift. Precursor Golem is also an S tier rare in many decks, but it performs very well in Gruul. It, once again, it's colorless artifact creature you can use your Power Stones to ramp to. And also worth noting is that if you target one golem with a combat trick like Giant Growth or Gaia's Gift, it applies to every golem. That can be a really fun synergy, specifically in Gruul. My last S tier rare for Gruul is Teething Wormlet. It performs the best in Gruul because you are producing Power Stones and then playing a big beefy artifact creature, so you can reliably grow this card every single turn. If I pack one, pick one this, I'm definitely looking to be in Gruul. Now for the Mythics, Cityscape Leveler is a great card to ramp to with Power Stones. It's great in any deck, but my brain definitely goes to Gruul if I pack one, pick one this. And then, as I mentioned in my last guide, Draconic Destiny is a superstar in Gruul. You can protect your enchanted creature from being exiled with Gaia's Gift. Since exile stops Draconic Destiny from returning to your hand, it's nice to be able to prevent that. And then you can give your big beefy creature flying and fire breathing, and it's a great way to win the game. So, I hope you enjoyed my simple guide to Gruul. Remember to hit like and subscribe to help support me. You can catch me Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. And if you have a specific archetype you'd like to see next, let me know by voting on Patreon or leaving a comment below. The link will be included in the description, and you do not need to subscribe to Patreon to cast a vote. So, thank you all for the support, and I'll see you next week.